Florida's housing market is on fire, and the numbers prove it. Over the past year, home prices across the state have surged well above the national average, with cities like Miami, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville leading the charge. The median home price in many of these areas has skyrocketed, and listings are being snatched up in record time. For many, it feels almost impossible to keep up. While other states are starting to see cooling trends, Florida remains an outlier. Demand is stronger than ever, and the market shows little sign of slowing down. But why exactly are prices in Florida rising so fast? There are a few major factors at play. First, migration into the state has exploded. People from New York, New Jersey, Illinois, and other northern states are moving to Florida in huge numbers, drawn by lower taxes, warmer weather, and the promise of a better lifestyle. This flood of new residents puts enormous pressure on housing supply, and that supply is already tight. Construction has been hampered by labor shortages, rise in material costs, and delays. On top of that, big investors and corporations are quietly buying up large blocks of homes, reducing availability for regular families. Another critical factor is inflation and interest rates. Mortgage rates have risen, making monthly payments more expensive, but surprisingly, demand hasn't cooled. Buyers are still competing for limited properties, which pushes prices even higher. At the same time, inflation makes building new homes more costly, which means developers can't keep up with the need. The cycle feeds itself, and the result is relentless upward pressure on prices. The real impact, however, is being felt by Florida residents themselves. Locals are increasingly priced out of their own communities. Rents are climbing just as fast as home prices, leaving families struggling to afford housing. Young professionals and first-time buyers are finding ownership nearly impossible. Retirees, who once flocked to Florida for affordability, are now feeling squeezed. Some long-time residents are even leaving the state because they simply can't keep up with rising costs. So what comes next for Florida's housing market? Experts are divided. Some believe prices will keep climbing as demand continues to pour in, while others warn of a bubble that could eventually burst. For now, the only certainty is that Florida has become one of the most competitive and expensive real estate markets in the country, and everyone, from new buyers to lifelong residents, is being forced to adapt. Florida's housing market has become one of the hottest in the nation, and many people are asking the same question: why are prices rising so fast? To understand this surge, we need to break down the forces driving the state's housing frenzy. The first major factor is migration. Florida has become the top destination for people relocating from other states, especially from high-tax and high-cost regions like New York, New Jersey, and California. These new arrivals bring greater buying power, and when they compete with local buyers for limited homes, bidding wars drive up prices. Simply put, more people are chasing fewer homes, and that imbalance pushes costs higher. Next, we need to look at supply issues. While demand is soaring, Florida's housing supply hasn't kept pace. Builders face challenges such as rising construction costs, shortages of skilled labor, and delays in the delivery of materials. Even when developers break ground, the process is slower and more expensive than ever before. This shortage of available housing makes existing properties more valuable, and sellers know they can demand top dollar. Another force at play is corporate and investor activity. Large real estate investment firms and private equity companies are buying up single-family homes, often in cash deals, and then turning them into rentals. This reduces the inventory available for everyday families looking to buy. The effect is clear. Prices rise, and ownership becomes more difficult for average Floridians. We also can't ignore the role of interest rates and inflation. Higher mortgage rates make it harder for buyers to afford monthly payments. Yet the surprising thing is demand hasn't cooled. People are still determined to buy, which means they stretch their budgets even further. Meanwhile, inflation makes it costlier to build new homes, keeping supply tight. Together, these pressures create a market where affordability is slipping out of reach. Finally, Florida's unique lifestyle appeal adds fuel to the fire. Warm weather, no state income tax, and a booming job market attract both retirees and young professionals. When people view Florida not just as a place to live, but as an investment in their future, they're willing to pay more to secure property. All of these forces combined, migration, supply shortages, investor purchases, inflation, and lifestyle demand, explain why Florida's housing prices are rising so fast. The question now is how long this trend can continue before the market faces a reckoning. One of the biggest forces shaping Florida's housing market right now is a combined impact of inflation and interest rates. These two economic factors don't just affect home buyers on paper. They directly determine how much people can afford, how many homes get built, and whether the housing market keeps heating up or cools down. Let's start with inflation. Over the past few years, inflation has driven up the cost of almost everything: groceries, gas, and yes, housing materials. Lumber, concrete, and steel prices all surged, which made it much more expensive for builders to start and finish new projects. Higher building costs mean fewer new homes are being added to the market, and when supply falls behind demand, prices rise. On top of that, everyday Floridians are spending more on basic necessities, leaving them with less disposable income to save for down payments, making homeownership feel increasingly out of reach. Now let's turn to interest rates. The Federal Reserve has raised rates to combat inflation, but those higher rates also translate into higher mortgage costs. A loan that might have cost a buyer $1,800 a month a few years ago can now cost over $2,500 for the same house. That huge jump in monthly payments has priced out thousands of different buyers. It's a squeeze that feels impossible. People want to buy, but their borrowing power has shrunk dramatically. However, here's the twist. Despite high interest rates, demand in Florida has remained unusually strong. Why? Because people are still flocking to the state for its warm climate, tax advantages, and lifestyle appeal. This means that even though borrowing is more expensive, buyers are competing fiercely, and in some areas, prices continue climbing instead of dropping. For sellers, this environment has been a mixed bag. On one hand, they can still command high prices, but on the other hand, there are fewer qualified buyers who can afford those homes. For renters, it's even worse. Since buying is more difficult, more people turn to renting, which has sent rental prices soaring across Florida. In short, inflation makes homes more expensive to build, while high interest rates make them harder to buy. Together, they form a perfect storm that keeps the housing market under intense pressure. Until one of these forces eases, affordability in Florida will remain one of the state's most pressing challenges. When we talk about Florida's housing market crisis, it's not just about numbers, charts, or rising prices. The real story is what it means for everyday people who are trying to live, work, and raise families in the Sunshine State. The impact on Florida residents has been massive, and it's shaping everything from financial stability to lifestyle choices. For home buyers, the dream of owning a home feels further away than ever before. Many Floridians who once planned to buy are now stuck in a holding pattern, waiting for prices to cool down or interest rates to fall. Families that used to be able to upgrade to a bigger house find themselves priced out of their own neighborhoods. In some cases, young professionals and first-time buyers have had to completely give up on the idea of homeownership for now, settling instead for long-term renting. For renters, the situation is just as tough, if not tougher. Because so many people have been locked out of buying, the rental market has exploded. Apartment complexes and landlords know demand is sky high, so rents keep climbing, sometimes jumping by hundreds of dollars a month at lease renewal. This forces families to make hard choices, cutting back on essentials, working multiple jobs, or even moving farther away from city centers where housing is more affordable. But that creates another problem: longer commutes and higher transportation costs, which only add to the financial pressure. The ripple effects don't stop there. Rising housing costs affect businesses too. Workers in essential industries, teachers, nurses, service staff, are finding it increasingly difficult to live close to where they work. Some employers struggle to fill jobs because their employees can't afford housing nearby. This creates staffing shortages and disrupts local economies. For retirees, who make up a large portion of Florida's population, the market has been both a blessing and a burden. Those who already own homes have seen their property values soar, giving them more equity and potential wealth. But new retirees looking to downsize or relocate within Florida often find themselves shocked by the price tags, making it harder to make moves later in life. At the end of the day, the Florida housing crisis isn't just about real estate. It's about real lives. Whether you're renting, buying, or simply trying to keep up, the impact of rising costs is being felt in every corner of the state. When looking at Florida's housing market today, the big question everyone is asking is simple. What comes next? Prices have surged to levels that feel unsustainable. Rent is at an all-time high, and ordinary families are feeling the pressure. So, does Florida face a correction, a collapse, or another wave of growth? Let's break it down. First, many experts believe that interest rates will be the deciding factor. If rates remain high, borrowing costs will continue to keep buyers on the sidelines, reducing demand. This could cool the market and lead to a slowdown in price growth, especially in areas that have seen rapid, unsustainable spikes. However, if rates drop, a fresh flood of buyers could enter the market, driving competition back up and keeping prices elevated. Second, population growth in Florida shows no signs of slowing down. Every year, thousands of people move to Florida for its climate, job opportunities, and lower taxes compared to other states. This steady inflow of new residents creates constant demand for housing, which acts as a buffer against a complete market collapse. Even if prices dip, demand will likely keep them from falling too far. Third, the rental market will continue to be a huge factor. With so many people priced out of homeownership, rentals are hotter than ever. This means rents could remain high, and investors may keep buying up properties to cash in on the strong rental demand. The downside? Everyday Floridians could continue to struggle with affordability, leading to more financial strain. Fourth, government policies and local decisions could shape the future. If Florida leaders introduce incentives for affordable housing or put restrictions on corporate investors buying up large numbers of homes, it could provide relief. But so far, major changes haven't been put in place. Finally, we must consider the possibility of a market correction. Florida is not immune to economic cycles. If job growth slows, if insurance costs rise further, or if the broader U.S. economy faces a downturn, housing prices in Florida could take a hit. But whether that hit is a small dip or a major crash remains uncertain. In short, Florida's housing market future depends on interest rates, migration trends, and affordability solutions. One thing is clear. Residents will continue to feel the impact, no matter which direction the market moves next.